Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to our first Industrialist Live session. Thank you for joining. I'm Brian May. I'm the Managing Director of Accenture's industrial business here in North America. The Industrialist Live is one part of our outreach to the global industrial community, what we refer to that community as our Industrialist network. In addition to this live broadcast series, we also have monthly publications that go out, or a monthly publication that goes out, featuring three main sections or topics. One section is what we call Transformers. Transformers will be hearing from leaders in industrial on their views on innovation and other important topics. This month's issue features Mike Vale. Mike is from 3M. He looks after 3M safety and industrial business. He'll share a bit of thinking around their digital transformation, among a few other topics. Our publication also includes what we call Sparks, which is bringing to life innovations that are starting to be actioned in the market. These could be things like robotics in the ag industry, or how AI is being used to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So interesting topics around innovations. And then the third section is around insights, or as we call it, insights, which is highlighting thought leadership on topics that are very relevant to industrials. Last month, we featured, for example, a topic on sustainability. We featured, of course, one of the hottest topics out there right now, which is around cloud and how cloud is impacting industrial. So look for that publication. Let's talk about today's session, today's live session. You may have seen at this point a Mentimeter question pop up. You don't need to worry about that right now. After our first speaker spends a few minutes talking about some research that we did, we're going to come back to that question and ask you to share your thoughts on your services business. So stay tuned for that. Regarding this session is to address a very, very hot topic in industrial. As I think all of you have or are experiencing, industrial in general is going through a renaissance. There's reinvention happening across a number of dimensions, rethinking cost structures to make sure companies are fit for purpose and can be lean and get through tough times like we've experienced this year. Changing the way these B2B industrials engage customers through channels and marketplaces, and then of course leveraging all of the intelligence and data that comes from the fact that products are smart now and connected out in the marketplace. And those smart connected products just can fundamentally change how service is delivered, the experience that customers receive from folks like yourself. And that brings us to today. Today's session is all about services. We want to spend some time talking through some things that we found in the research that we did, as well as hearing from some folks in the market. So we have a great lineup of guests today to participate in the conversation, and I'd like to welcome them now. First, we have Jiva Dimitrova-Micha. Jiva is a principal director from Accenture, focusing on our industrial business. We also have Urban Hofström, who is also a principal director from Accenture. Both Urban and Jiva have been heavily involved in the research that we'll share today. So Jiva, Urban, hello and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
And then we're fortunate enough to have two executives from a couple of outstanding industrial companies. First of all, we have Mike Cuddy, who is the VP and CIO at Torment Industries. Mike, welcome.
Thanks, Brian.
And we have Arno Strötgen. Arno is a senior vice president and looks after customer service and digital platforms for ABB. Arno, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So a warm welcome to all of our guests, and thank you again for joining. Let's jump right in. I talked about how we did some fairly extensive research around services. We've researched hundreds of companies to find out where they are in the journey in terms of reinventing themselves around services, and the findings are quite interesting. So I want to start with a question for Jiva. Jiva, can you just spend a few minutes providing us with an overview of what came out of the research?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Brian. Glad to give you an overview about our research. So, but before I jump to the research results, please let me start with some general observations. So what we see on the market is that industrial companies are on the verge of a fundamental change of their business goals. Services such as MRO, installation, commissioning, training are getting on high importance for the overall company performance and growth. All successful service companies started actually with a strong position in the core domain, let's say, for example, installed base management. But however, scaling and differentiation requires further digitalization. So what we in general see is that industrial companies are already putting lots of efforts and focus on their service strategy, but we only see few of them really successfully conducted and realize their service transformations. For this reason, we conducted a research to investigate how industrial companies can successfully scale both the core and the new service businesses. Let me give you some numbers about our research. We asked 748 industrial service executives from across 14 countries to understand their service approaches. Let me give you some numbers. The regional split was 47% Europe, 13% US, 40% growth markets. And we also had the broad industrial scope, 46% industrial equipment, 23% automotive suppliers, 15% medtech, and 16% heavy equipment. So quite a broad scope you see in the study. And we got a bunch of quantitative and qualitative data, but we decided to analyze our result across 4 dimensions. So these were the overall profitability of the company, the service business profitability, the share of new service revenues, and the share of annual recurring revenues. Why we did this? Because we think that these KPIs clearly indicates the positive impact of the service on the overall business performance, the extent to which companies are already involved in the new digital service businesses, and the overall resilience during downtime. So according to these KPIs, we identified 4 different categories of companies: champions, masters, strivers, and traditionalists. So let me explain about these categories. Not surprisingly, but only 7% of the companies are champions. What is the special thing about these champions? They actually outshine their peers with the highest service profitability and the highest share of new service revenues. Champions have efficiently developed and launched new services with great economic success. What we see them actually having product as a service offering, output-based revenue models, and so on. The majority of champions comes from US and medtech. So the second category. The second category are the masters. 22% of our companies are masters. Masters actually grow core services, and in the same time, they are also scaling new ones to achieve a stable, robust service profitability. Of all categories, master have by far the highest annual recurring revenue shares, of course, making them very stable to business downturns and to volatilities on the markets. So the third group. The third group are strivers, and I personally find this group most interesting. Why? The strivers actually are already on the journey, on this transformation journey. So they rush into new services, often without a clear strategy and goals. And they may have invested in wrong areas or into many fields in the same time. But also very important, in the same time, they didn't do their basic homework, mainly to optimize their core processes and systems to the requirements and an efficient service business. The fourth group we identified are the traditionalists. So compared to the other groups, traditionalists focus mostly on their core businesses, and they are very successful in what they are doing. And this might be the right strategy for today. However, we see the risk for sustainable future success. Let me talk about some challenges we saw or we identified from our study. Actually, we saw 4 areas that companies struggle with. The first, unclear focus on the service strategy and insufficient investment into the business. Second point, the inadequate, mostly product-based management practices and KPIs to drive the success of the service business. Third one is the lack of service capabilities and experience concerning the ability to build service sales and delivery skills, as well as digital capabilities. And the fourth thing is the right place in the service ecosystem in terms of the right collaboration model. So IT and cloud providers are potentially seen as both desired partners and strong competitors concerning key data and customer engagement. But we also learned from the champions, and I would like to share these insights. We actually identified also 4 areas in which the champions are very successful, and these 4 areas are the main drivers and the key success factors from our perspective. First is the champions have an integrated sales and service approach and ambitious targets to manage core and new service business. Second, they sustainably and systematically invest in new business models on a solid digital foundation and clear strategy. The champions have an effective and scalable delivery through standardization, harmonization, and knowledge sharing. And the fourth point is they proactively manage their service ecosystem. Finally, one thought about the COVID resilience. Our research revealed that a stronger focus on service-driven business model is helping industrial companies to better balance pre- and post-COVID-19 economic challenges. More than 60% of our respondents said their service business accelerating during the pandemic, and they plan to extend services. Brian, that's from my side.
Jiva, thank you. And I've read through the research findings a few times, and every time I do, I seem to find some new nugget in there. It's really good stuff. We will be sharing for our audience. We will be sharing a link later in the session toward the end how you can actually access the findings. Hopefully, you'll find those to be interesting as well. So this leads me to a question that I'd like to ask the audience. You heard Jiva talk about, on one end of the spectrum, the champions, the people who are very advanced and not only optimizing core services, but also inventing new services and bringing new services to their customers. And then the other end of the spectrum are people who are very good at the traditional or the core service and probably starting to think about how to make the pivot to the new. What I'd like you to do is now take a minute and share your thoughts through the Mentimeter that's up on where your business fits in across those 4 categories of champions, masters, strivers, and traditionalists. A couple of points. First of all, this is completely anonymous, so you can feel free to enter exactly how you wish. No one will see the result coming specifically from you. And then the other point is just a logistical point. If you are in full screen mode, you may not see the Mentimeter pop up. You may need to pull out of full screen mode to see it. Again, all anonymous. Enter your thoughts on your company, and then we will share the aggregate results a bit later in the session. So while people are entering their response in Mentimeter, let's get started with a few more questions for our panelists. And I'd like to start with Mike Cuddy from Toromont. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what's driving Toromont to not only transform your core service business, which of course is so important to your business, but also to develop new digitally driven services?
Sure. You can hear me okay, Brian?
Yes, a little bit soft, but I can hear you, yes.
Really? That's a compliment for me. Thank you. I was just reflecting on what Jiva said and how eloquently and well organized your thoughts are as a company. I'll try to do my best to organize our thoughts my thoughts as well. Toromont's a distributor of heavy construction equipment in a number of industries. So, what drives us? I think if we look back 5 years from now, we'll see that companies like ours in the industrial space, we're at a fork in the road. We talk about it as an imaginary fork in the road. We can either do what we've been doing and, we'll probably have continue on as we have, maybe who knows what that looks like, or we can accelerate and create a new trajectory. And the reason what drives us are really sort of changes that are happening that really allow us in a concrete way to create real new value, true new value. One is sensors and IoT. The fact that all the equipment that we sell and we service is generating an enormous amount of incredibly valuable data because the cost of sensors has become so low. Sensors can be everywhere to create more data. The second thing is just data science. What would it cost us $1 million, $2 million to get capability for doing statistical analysis is today, a fraction of that cost and can be purchased on an incremental basis. And I'll give you an example. Historically, we've segmented the marketplace manually, right? We've looked at our customers in the gas compression space. We used to segment by horsepower range. In the power play space, we used to segment by kilowatt hour. In the services area, we would segment by how a customer might have repairs done to their equipment, whether they did them themselves or they had a service provider do them. We'd painstakingly manually do all that. Today, we can run data science models across all our customer data and automatically through pattern recognition see customers that behave in similar ways, which is one, insanely valuable for us to understand better how to serve them, and two, at a fraction of the cost. So data science is huge. Cloud and public APIs that allow us to grab data and grab processing, sort of related to the data science comment, is another. Our ability to do that and expand on both on a much more cost-effective basis. And probably the last thing driving us is that, if you're 35 or under, you've grown up with technology that's largely prescriptive. Like you've reached out into a cloud environment, whether it's Facebook or Twitter and Instagram or whatever, to get questions answered. And if you think about the amount of decisions and responsibility in the industry today that is managed by people that are in that age bracket, and it's just going to grow, is enormous. So the emerging workforce that's taking more and more responsibility has an understanding on how to put all of this technology to work to create, ultimately, what drives us is creating more value for both us, for the manufacturer that we represent, and ultimately, and most importantly, for our customers.
Great, thank you, Mike. And it certainly is interesting. If you go back not too many years ago, the approach would be figure out what you want to do in the process, in the engagement and all this, and then figure out how technology enables that. It's almost like that's flipped these days. And the advancement of technology is almost like the catalyst to the transformation that's happening. And your point about the customers is spot on. I mean, the customers know it. They know that the technology is there. They want to have a different experience that's a lot of times technology enabled. So it's great to hear that, Mike. Thank you. Let's go to Arno. Arno, let me ask you the same question. What's driving ABB to transform your services business?
Yeah, I think if you look at the business or from the business perspective, I think a few years back, we also discussed, I think that everybody else were all pushed to increase revenues, and we noticed that yes, I think that although we had a good service business on the traditional maintenance and spare parts, we measured that will probably go down, because as every new generation of robots we develop, they are more reliable, have, let's say, 50% less parts, they become need less maintenance. So we said, oh, how can we disconnect our revenues from just the traditional business? And it was not an easy decision, because of course you have the highest margin on the spare parts, but and if you develop new services, initially you have to invest a lot to develop that, either in cloud services, digital, or others. So at that time when we decided to invest, I mean, it was for sure for a long journey. I think now we are at the stage where we have 9,500 robots connected worldwide with over 1,000 customer sites. And yeah, I mean, the learning you have, and that was one of the business, but the other was also talking to our customers. I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive to say that, I mean, you make the revenues when the customer plan fails. So at the end, it was also to say that when we discussed with a lot of our customers, they said, how can you help us to improve uptime, increase efficiency? And by that, I mean, talking just about mechanical, I mean, the robots are normally pretty reliable. So it was now, how do we help the operation? And for that, we did the data. And now when we see, for example, compare the data from the different robots, we can then check what are the things, what is happening in different shifts, what could we suggest to our customers, to improve. And a lot of times it's operational, it's micro stops due to different equipment that is linked to the robot. And that's where we're focusing on. Something we call, for example, fleet assessment, where we look at the fleet of the customer and say, what are the most critical assets? And then we say, for example, well, maybe you just need to do the maintenance on the most critical, the ones that are more stressed, and by that save maintenance costs, but still keep the same uptime. So that's where we that's the road we have been going, but it's a continuous investment and continuous learning on the data and getting more out of the investment.
That's great. Thanks, Arno. And, it's interesting to hear your perspective, because what I heard was you have a very strong service business, but yet you recognize the need to continue to transform, to not only protect that service business, but also to look for new revenue streams in and around that core business, and things like your fleet assessment offering. So that's very interesting. And Mike, thank you as well. It's great to hear from you guys that are living it every day in the field. Let me switch over to Urban. Urban, when you think about the research findings that you and Jiva were involved with, as well as the clients that you're serving in the marketplace, how do you see them responding to these drivers for change?
Thank you, Brian. Well, actually, I see them responding too slow. And if you look at the study, most of the companies surveyed, and that was a good reflection of the rest of the market, more than 50% are traditionalists or strivers, meaning that they're not really moving at all, which is, of course, a surprise. Both ways, it's surprised they don't move, and I'm not surprised they don't move, because normally in these companies, service is included in and embedded in a organization that was set up to design and manufacture product. So it's very hard for them to break out of that. But 7% really broke out of that, and it was a good reflection of the clients I deal with. That makes them the champions. And the three things they really look at that makes them break out is, of course, the integrated sales approach, which Jiva talked about. But it means that you also then put salespeople in place. If you sell something, the likelihood that your revenues will go up is much, much higher if you don't have anyone responsible for selling. So that's pretty good. If they do that, also an embracement of e-commerce and other sales channels is unique in that. If I look at the other point, which is very important, is the systematic approach of the digital business models. Both Mike and Arno talked a bit about that. I see that as a main driver, which they're trying to embrace. But last but not least, it's of course the ecosystem again. We're going to come back to that a bit later again. And what we mean by that is not to have a magnitude of partner, but to have a few qualified partners. One company I know since about 20 years back, based in Milwaukee, you can guess who it is. But looking at what they've done just during the last year, where they have reshaped their organization completely and lined up with a lot of partners that are consulting companies, software companies, in order to build more value around their product offering is quite interesting, and I see that as a mega trend also for other companies going forward. Back to you, Brian.
Yeah, Urban, it's an interesting point. I mean, the ecosystem is such an important part of this. You know, the platform providers, the technology providers. You know, if pace is what industrials need to go after, you know, leveraging other people's innovation, leveraging other people's, frankly, investment and money, creates pace and drives a different level of innovation. So it's interesting, and I think our research certainly suggests that. I also heard, you know, the industry in general needs to pick up the pace a bit. So maybe that's a good lead into my next question, which I'll direct to Mike Cuddy. Mike, what are some of the challenges you're facing at Toromont, or that you deal with a lot of different industries that you're seeing in industry as you pivot to these new powerful services businesses?
Well, I think we reflect, you know, some of the research that's been done and been talked about just now. Culture's probably, you know, right at the forefront for us. We're as a Caterpillar dealer, we're incredibly proud of the brand that we represent. You know, one of the finest, you know, products in the industrial equipment space there is, and you know, we're steeped in decades of pride in the brand of the equipment, the product. And as we're talking about shifting to services, you know, the cultural shift is extending, if you will, the brand value and messaging across to much more than the actual hard good itself. And there's we could talk for an hour just on that topic. So but that cultural shift and mindset change is one of the challenges. You know, another one though is mastering the underlying technology set. You know, mastering data coming off sensors and database technologies. You know, Brian, you mentioned a minute ago about flipping things. You know, the process is sort of flipped, and it's very true. You know, we're now pulling it. The traditional application approach is that you design an application around a process, and that application thereby, you know, captures data and puts it in a system, if you will. And now the model is evolving to the opposite, right? Where data coming off of sensors and data insights coming out of algorithms now create workflow opportunities, right? It now initiates process. And so, you know, master those technologies and even user access control and security. I've been through a lot of audits over the years, and our industry as solution providers has developed, you know, our model is that you get access to data through an application, and therefore, you know, we have role-based models for who has access to what. And in an analytics world, it doesn't work that way. The data comes in, and now you've got to figure out who has access to what, because there isn't necessarily one application that has dominion over that data. And then the last challenge is you really have to think about this going to market with services as value proposition engineering. You know, in a product world, you've got a product and it has a value that it creates for a customer. You know, today with data and understanding all of the ways we can create, you know, lower cost operating models for our customers with their equipment, it's really a matter of putting pieces together and engineering what is the best value proposition for that customer. So that's the third challenge. That's a different way of looking at how we create and take a value proposition to market.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, thank you. Those are all important points. I mean, the point about value proposition engineering, it really is a cultural thing. I mean, if you think about changing the mindset of the workforce to think not about how do I make the best product, but how do I create the most value. And that's important. Now, understanding the customer as well as they understand themselves is part of that. And then on the data side, you're spot on. I mean, the amount of data that's out there and the need to turn that into insight, there's a talent aspect to that I think is incredibly important. I just want to make one reminder before I go to Jiva with a quick question that we will have time at the end for questions from the audience, and you can feel free to start entering things that are on your mind in the chat. All of the questions will come through the chat today. Enter them in the chat if you have something on your mind, and we'll process as many as we can toward the end of the call. So Jiva, just continuing on with Mike's answer to the question, how do you see your clients, addressing some of these challenges?
Brian, I'm very much doing projects within the area of front office transformation, and let me give you the answer from this perspective. What I see of my business area is an increase of big corporate front office transformation programs, and they are put in a different segments, in a different steps. So everything starts with an integrated, let's say, business and product planning, so between the sales and the service. This is the first step. Many companies afterwards or during this process are discussing new KPIs. For example, classical product-oriented companies, they steer by growth and revenue and profitability, and many of them start thinking about including also ARR, Net Promoter Score, ROE in their segments. So this is the second step, and the third step, of course, are these big transformation programs, which aims 360-degree on the customer data transparency, but also they aim, as Mike said previously, very much on a better collaboration between the sales and the service organization. Now back to you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it certainly is a different business. Services is a different business than selling a product. You got to sell it different, and you certainly have to measure it different. And as they say, you get what you measure. So let's go over to Arno. Arno, why is now the right time for ABB to pivot to these digitally enabled services? Why is it now?
Maybe I would like to start with what Mike actually mentioned also, is that one is the technology. I think we started 10 years ago connecting the robot via GPRS, and at that time it was very difficult, one, due to the cloud technologies, due to the cost. And every time we had a robot, we had to put in extra equipment. So as he said, the sensors are going down tremendously, because now let's say in every mobile phone, you have like 8 sensors. That has brought down the sensor cost. Even now the new iPhone 12 has, for example, LiDAR sensor that before cost like $20,000. So sensors are going down, then also the transmission cost of data, and so that's one of the main a big part of it. The second, I think, is that now the customers are more open to embrace and get into digital, and are not so afraid to connect. I think something that really increased the speed quite a bit was actually the COVID. So when we started in March, April, we launched actually a digital campaign to support our customers, where we had a simulation software. We said, well, you can use it free of charge, and we had an immense amount of downloads only in a few days. The acceptance also due to remote assistance increased, because everybody is now used to this. For example, Medium like Zoom and others, and Microsoft Assist, and I think customers realized that before maybe the acceptance was not there. It was always easier to have a technician on site, but now also, for example, with the virtual training, we have started virtual training, and the first time that customers done it, they were hesitant, but after they do it, they see that actually even the exams and the tests are quite accurate, quite similar to what they learned when they come to class. So I think a combination in the future will continue. I think customers are more open to that, and that's why I think it's a good moment now to speed it up.
Yeah, for sure. They're definitely not only open to it, but expecting it in many ways. So thanks, Arno. Jiva, we've heard from Mike and Arno. What advice can you give to industrial companies that are in the middle of this pivot to services?
Wow, a very good question. And I can tell you my most favorite story I'm telling to my customers, because I experience actually many customers who directly jump into this new world of database, new business revenue streams and so on. And they are very disappointing why these projects are not running. So my story to my client is to always look in two dimensions on a service portfolio. This means to look, of course, on an extension and further development of the service portfolio, but to begin actually by the utilization of their installed base, because without transparency on your installed base, without basic connectivity, you will be never able to really connect or drive this new service work. And on the other hand side, what should be driven hand in hand is actually the service execution. This means the alignment and the optimization of all services, service processes and system across the company. And the second point is something what I experience is not always going hand in hand with the business development.
Yeah, there's definitely a portfolio management component to this in terms of how much energy goes to the new services versus how much goes to optimizing the core. And that balance, I think, is a really important thing, and I think we see that in the results, certainly with the champions. Mike, let's talk about what it takes to be successful. Based on your experience, what are some of the critical success factors to pivoting to one of these powerful services businesses?
Well, I'm not sure I can speak as much from experience as I'd like to, Brian, as much as we're looking at where we're headed and how we're trying to be great at this. First is just maintaining constant focus on value creation for customers. Our customers are construction companies, road builders, aggregate companies. They're not changing. They're not waiting. They're evolving through this and learning how to get more and more data off all of the portfolio of equipment and how to manage the projects and jobs and everything. So constantly understanding and they vary in shape and size and aptitude. So focus on our market is number one. Number two is embracing digital channels. While that's more commonplace, if you will, in consumer. By digital, I mean, and channels, I mean, mobile and online and the integration of all of those. We're not in B2B. It also includes direct integration between companies as part of the supply chain. So all of that is critically important for us. And then the third one likely is what Jiva mentioned around KPIs, right? I mean, we need new measures that reflect how we perform differently in the future. We need not only management KPIs, but new incentive systems, reward systems on how we remunerate and compensate our management and teams to reflect the behaviors that we're moving to versus what we're coming from.
That's good. I mean, those are three important points for sure. Urban, how are you seeing your clients addressing these points and just the urgency in general of making this pivot happen sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about that, of course. If you look to the left of me, you see 8 imperatives, and these are the imperatives that comes across in this study very strongly from the people who are champions. And let me take you through each and every one of them very quickly here. So business transparency, I mean, it sounds like trivial, but it's not all the case in all the people we are working with, all the companies, but it basically it's very important to have understanding of where is the profit coming from, what's the true profitability of the business in order to make the right business decision and not compensate loss-making product businesses by allocating funds to them from service, etc. So companies successful, they have that transparency. Number 2, centricity, of course, for a service organization is quite obvious, but you should be surprised of the survey data that even the champions don't have customer satisfaction as the number one KPI. they have it, but it's far down the list. Solid digital foundation, of course, is important. Not only investing into the new, but also having a foundation where you can actually use the new technology. And you don't have a foundation where you can hardly send an email, which we see in many of the traditional industrialist companies, that there's not enough investment going into that. It's still lagging behind. Investment into the new, touching into the KPIs, very, very few have the long-term KPIs, they have short-term KPIs, next quarter, next 6 months, but not enough KPIs to actually pivot into the new and have a 3 to 5 year horizon of where you want to go in the new. The next two are doesn't sound too exciting, does it? Standardization and knowledge, boring subjects, but very, very important. But people are really successful. They standardize the way they design the offering, the way they sell it, and the way they deliver it, both for the core business and the new business. And that differentiates them significantly from people who are not successful. Knowledge, of course, is very important. And I can take one concrete example of a company that I work with in life science here in Switzerland, about 16,000 people in the service field force. They have a real issue, and that is that half of them will retire within 5 years. And as you know, it's very few people wants to become service managers these days or service technicians. It's very hard to recruit new ones. So where do they store that knowledge? How do they make that knowledge from the people who are retiring available to everybody who needs it, including the clients? So knowledge management and how you set up that structure is becoming more and more important. The next thing is the customer participation. Driven by COVID, we also see that as a trend. People don't want technicians running in and out of their premises anymore. I mean, if you are in life science, your clients are hospitals or clinics, and they don't want people running in and out. They want to have a service, but if you can do it remotely, it's really good. And if you can use their own workforce who already are in the hospital to do work, it's even better. They will even pay you extra for it. So that's driving it. It also goes for the elevator business, where we see that trend, where people want elevator inspections done remotely now these days and not really having people doing it on site. Ecosystem, again, I come back to that point because it's really, really key. And I mentioned the company I worked for and worked with for the last 20 years for doing the transformation into a new ecosystem environment. And that is really clear. Nobody can do everything themselves anymore. You need partners, and you need to share with the partners and have a more an open attitude to what each partnership will bring, and not have the sort of perhaps the engineering-driven mindset that we have in most industrial company, not invented here thing. So ecosystem, again, not the multitude of partners, but the quality of partner network. So these things are very clearly coming out of the study and also from my experience of what successful companies are doing. It may not look like rocket science, so this is not, business transparency, customer centricity. Everybody does that, you might think, but everybody doesn't do it all the time. And if you want to be successful, if you do this and you do it in a good way, in a good project, you'll be successful. And the thing when I talk to clients and I put this up and they say, so I ask them, why don't you do this? And it's hard for them to explain, but there's one thing that really is the most biggest hurdle for them to overcome when it comes to doing these things, and that's about 12 centimeters. And these 12 centimeters are really important, and companies spend millions to come over this 12 centimeters, and it's basically from one side of the head to the other side of the head. And that's where you have the drawback today in companies who wants to go forward. It's not that this is difficult to do, it's difficult to comprehend and what it will mean for the organization going forward. But it's clearly there, and we see more and more companies taking this direction. So back to you, Brian, for closing.
Excellent, Urban, thank you. And certainly what the cultural aspects of this is half the battle. There's no question with that last 12 centimeters to your point. So I want to make my own pivot here and take some questions from the audience. We have a few that came in. I would say that if you have questions, please put them in the chat window now, and we'll address them in a minute. Before we go to the questions from the audience, though, let's take a look at the Mentimeter results. So we have our research had about a third of the respondents saying they're champions or masters. we clearly have overachievers in this audience, because about 2/3 of the folks on this call feel they're champions or masters. So advancing nicely in terms of the pivot, which is awesome. I would welcome an opportunity. We would welcome an opportunity to understand more about some of the things you all are doing. You'll see some contact information a bit later in the broadcast where you can reach out to us, but definitely would be interested to hear more about what you're doing, because we do have some overachievers in the group today. That's awesome. Let's go to some questions. So I want to address the first question to Urban, since he's already on the mic. Urban, there's a question about champions and whether or not champions can emerge in companies where service is not a business unit. Service is a function like HR or like sales and marketing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course I can. I don't believe they can champion. It becomes more a technical support organization. I believe if you have a strategic intent to grow your service business, if you set yourself up as an autonomous service organization, including your own sales force, your own marketing organization, and you're really owning your own destiny, you'll be successful. Companies who do that, set up a separate service organization initially to focus on it, are more successful in their service business, but they're also more successful as companies. It's very important to remember that. People who are embedding the service organization in a product-driven organization will not have the same success. Service people will be encapsulated in that product culture and mentality and will not be able to flourish and drive the business forward. That's very clearly how we see it from my experience.
Excellent. Definitely need to treat it like it is, and that is a separate thing. There's no question. Let's go to another question. This one is for Arno. Arno, how much of your business, how much of ABB's business volume do you foresee will come from data-driven or digital-driven services 5 years from now?
It's a very good question. Well, I think that it depends how you measure it. We have been discussing that a lot internally. So one is, okay, what is digital? And some people said, well, is digital as long as it's connected? And then we said, well, most of our robots, we want them to be connected. But some of those services are enablers. So it's hard to separate. So some, for example, we offer, our sales, production sales with certain digital dashboards, and they kind of come with equipment. But then you have services that are really additional to what we do today. For example, this fleet assessment I was talking about, or really creating a suite of software that not only monitors the robot, but monitors, for example, a complete line or cell, and helps you to optimize your line. That is not even linked to the robot, it's more for a line and could even be outside of the traditional robot. And there, I would say around 20%, we want to grow that to be 20% of the revenues in 2025.
Great, thank you. Let me, we got one more coming through here. Let me address or direct this one to Mike Cuddy. Mike, what is the one thing that is most important when transforming your services business?
I think my best answer to that, Brian, is that's just it. There isn't one thing. Unlike many other sort of digital journeys we've been on with the general industry, like web application development or services architectures and things. This is a matter of a whole lot of things. There was a reference to ecosystems earlier. We're talking about sensors and Internet of Things technologies. Data management has to be understood and managed. Data science and statistics. Digital channels we've talked about. Commercial models are now new and different. How we sell services or monetize those between ourselves and our customers is different. And we've talked about internal change management has to be addressed. Management systems, things as simple as commission plans, and simulation-based supply chain methods. All of these things are the one thing, if you will, right? All of these have to work together and be changed and moved forward to create, really a much more high performing, higher value creation, much more efficient industry that I think is probably the most exciting place to be in the working world today.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this point, Mike, about how this is separate. It's different. It's different from product-centric businesses, and therefore it has to be treated different. And all those things you just rattled off are part of what needs to be in place to effectively run that different business. So I think that's good. Thank you. Let's take one more here. Maybe we'll have time for one or two more. Jiva, there's a high portion of champions in the US, according to the research. Why is that?
Very good question. Maybe we will try to answer this question together, Brian, as you are our industrial lead in US. But my opinion, that is, so you have to look to see this in connection with the medtech industry. So we recognize it's not only about US. It has to be seen with in connection with the high share of medtech companies, which are also champions. And in my personal opinion, of course, the number of medtech companies in the US area are very high. So maybe this is one reason. And medtech companies are, of course, one of the leaders of digital innovation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. When we think about industrial, it's made up of a lot of different subsegments. Including the medtech manufacturers, and that industry sub-industry, I guess, tends to be out in front a little bit. Now, it'll be interesting to see, are we seeing a similar thing for that sub-industry in other parts of the world? But certainly in North America, those companies are out in front when it comes to technology and disruption and all that. So I'm going to go one more, and then we're going to be called done here. Arno, what is the next wave of technology you see coming into the services marketplace?
Well, it's into the service. Well, I think sensors and data. I think we talked about. I don't think there's something drastically new in technology, but I think it's how do we use that data. I think the amount of data we're getting today is humongous. I think what we do with that data is still there's still a lot to be done. I think when we look at, and also look at customer sites, they get a lot of data, but how to take it apart and really make sure that you get to the root cause analysis of an issue. That's where I think in data analytics, I think there's some technologies, for example, in machine learning that can be used. I think that's also a future. How do we use machine learning to improve also in services? So I think that's where I see the future. How do we use the data with machine learning, with algorithms, and how do we really get to the root cause of an issue? Now we have all the data, but it's very difficult to take it apart and get to the real root cause.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. I mean, I think the massive amounts of data that are out there across every industry, every subsegment within industries is over the top. And how do you take that and do something with it? Leveraging machine learning, AI, and all the things that come with it. So, thank you. That brings us to the final part of this, which is just a couple closing remarks. First of all, I want to thank everyone for attending, our panelists for sure, and then of course everyone in the audience. This is a hot topic. You heard from Mike and Arno about their business and what it means to their business. You heard the research. It's a hot topic. We can debate the number, but suffice it to say, not too many years down the road, a significant amount of these industrials business will come through services. We certainly think not too many years down the road, it could double from what it is today. So getting in front of this and beginning the pivot is really important. Hopefully you all got a bit out of this today and can take some ideas back to your companies. The research we talked about today was actually launched today. It's the Blueprint for Service Success. And I think there's a link. Yeah, there's a link in your window now that you can see where you can actually access that that research and see the details that Jiva and Urban gave the summary of. And finally, I just want to say thanks again to our speakers and everybody. I want to say thanks to our audience. If there's any questions, comments, ideas, feedback on the session, sharing your learnings in terms of service that you want to share with us, or double clicking into any part of the research, you can see. I think our contact information is showing, or it was showing. You can reach out to Urban, Jiva, or myself at any time, and we'll make the right connections for you. So again, thank you so much for attending, and hopefully you have a great day and a great upcoming holiday. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.